3%. That's the small number that ignited a trade firestorm, exposing the complete emptiness of Donald Trump. With just a 3% tax on digital revenue, Canada threatened to pull $2 billion out of the pockets of U.S. tech giants, only to be met with a rant. Stupid. Make no mistake, Canada didn't start this. The 3% digital services tax was a necessary response after enduring Trump's ridiculous tariffs on steel and aluminum. It was Canada's counterpunch directly targeting America's prize tech giants, Trump's cherished darlings. Even though Canada later officially canceled the plan, the real damage to America had already been done, and just the mere threat of this tax revealed the truth about the so-called master negotiator. He panicked, fumbled, and reacted like a cornered animal rather than a skilled diplomat. Earlier, after Canada decided to implement the digital services tax, Trump quickly fired back with shocking remarks. It's not going to work out well for Canada. They were foolish to do it. This isn't the language of a leader. It's the tone of someone with a poor vocabulary resorting to insults. Stupid. That's Trump's reflex when the other side doesn't kneel. He blamed Canada for daring to implement the digital services tax, a legitimate self-defense move, all while ignoring the fact that he was the one who lit the match in this trade war. Trump swung his tariff stick at steel, aluminum, and a whole range of Canadian products, spreading chaos. Canada is now the largest supplier of aluminum and steel to the U.S. Starting in June, the U.S. raised tariffs on aluminum and steel imports to 50%. But when Canada retaliated with a reasonable and fitting digital services tax, Trump called them stupid. This is cowardice disguised as anger, a tantrum from someone who can't accept defeat. Meanwhile, Trump's rage and the anger of his capitalist buddies were predictable. Scott Bessent, U.S. Treasury Secretary, don't like the taxes, and obviously we think it's patently unfair to do it retroact. The digital services tax targets the one thing they actually care about, profit. Let's call it what it is. This 3% tax isn't a punishment. It's an overdue action to restore fairness. For years, giants like Google, Meta, and Amazon have been exploiting Canadian user data, raking in billions with almost no contribution to the local economy. Now, when Canada asks them to give a little back, they scream unfair. The real question isn't whether retroactive taxes are fair, but why the injustice of these corporations being tax-free for so long was tolerated in the first place. Trump turned everything into chaos. Businesses didn't know which products would be taxed next. Customers stopped spending, suppliers halted orders, and jobs were left hanging. This is exactly what happened. While Trump gleefully taps away on Truth Social, Canadian and even U.S. businesses struggle in the mess he created. If Trump is a child randomly pulling levers to see what blows up, Carney is the engineer carefully adjusting the machine. Michael Gist, an economic expert, warns, "We are going ahead even while we're negotiating was a risky move, and to the extent to which we thought maybe the U.S. was bluffing, we've learned that they're not. They thought a few threats would make Canada back down, but Canada didn't play by Trump's rules. They called out his scam." While the U.S. flaunted its power, Canada kept negotiating and making wise decisions both domestically and internationally. It was a clear statement. We won't be bullied. The U.S.'s response? More of Trump's threats making headlines. It's the familiar script of someone who can only solve problems with a hammer. America burns down its own house and then sues its neighbor for putting out the fire too slowly. This is the height of absurdity. The current president is a master of coming soon promises. Deals almost done, always in the future tense. He stands at G7 summits, shaking hands and smiling in front of cameras, making promises about deals. A few weeks later, those promises end up in the political trash bin alongside other broken ones. His words float away with the wind. Meanwhile, Carney and the Canadian government are working behind the scenes, quietly making America squirm. No tweets, no drama, just action. The Canadians didn't just survive Trump's tariff storm. They've come out stronger. That's irrefutable proof. While one side makes headlines, the other builds prosperity. One leaves with tweets, the other with results. I don't think I'll need to. Donald Trump's cold statement when asked about extending tariffs on allies. A seemingly trivial remark, but it exposes his lethal arrogance, serving as the catalyst for pushing America's closest ally, Canada, out of Washington's embrace. Ironically, the America First policy seems to have ended with the U.S. losing on its own turf, as Canada's oil quietly flows toward their strategic rival, China. In a recent interview, when asked about extending the 9th of July tariff deadline, Trump casually responded to Maria Bartiromo of Fox News, "I don't think I'll need to." Like an emperor granting a favor, he added, "I could. No big deal." In just a few words, the essence of the America First foreign policy was laid bare. A mix of unpredictable threats and blatant disregard for allies. Trump likely believed this was Heil negotiation, a tactic to force other nations to bend, but things didn't unfold as he expected. The U.S.-C relationship, built on decades of trust and shared interests, became the first casualty of Trump's doctrine. Instead of nurturing the alliance, Trump treated Canada as a challenger to be corrected. His talk of making Canada the 51st state and imposing sky-high tariffs pushed the northern neighbor to seek an escape route, and that route was made of steel, stretching thousands of miles to the Pacific coast. Pressed into a corner, Canada responded. The controversial Trans Mountain Pipeline expansion, once just an infrastructure project, became a national strategy. The goal of TMX was clear and unapologetic: to transport crude oil from Alberta to the Pacific coast, providing Canadian producers with direct access to Asian markets. In other words, TMX was a means to break free from the almost total dependence on the U.S. market, a dependence that became a burden and a national security risk under Trump. When it was complete, the first to show interest wasn't just anyone. It was China, America's #1 strategic rival. Reports from Reuters in the Institute for Energy Research, IER, confirmed an undeniable truth. China quickly became the top buyer of Canadian oil, surpassing the U.S. for crude flowing through the Trans Mountain Pipeline. The expanded pipeline began operations in May 2024, with its capacity tripling to 890,000 barrels per day, equivalent to the Keystone XL pipeline. Previously, the U.S. Midwest was the primary market for Canadian oil, importing 90%, or around 4 million barrels per day, via north-south pipelines from Alberta's oil production heartland. Now, China had ramped up its oil transport through Trans Mountain to an average of 207,000 barrels per day. Since the pipeline expansion, Canada's oil exports to countries outside the U.S. surged nearly 60%, reaching a record 183,000 barrels per day in 2024. This is the ultimate irony. A geopolitical farce so absurd it's hard to believe. While Trump loudly proclaims on social media about being tough on China and imposing tariffs to contain Beijing, his own policies have handed China a priceless strategic gift. With its insatiable demand for energy to fuel its economy, China found a stable, secure source from a G7 nation, with a border stretching to its rival. They didn't need complex diplomacy or economic pressure. They just waited for Trump's short-sightedness to do the job for them. What makes this failure even more bitter is the reality behind Trump's rhetoric. He constantly boasted about making America energy independent. But as the CEO of Cenis Energy, one of Canada's largest oil producers, bluntly told Reuters, the U.S. remains heavily reliant on Canadian oil. U.S. refineries, especially in the Midwest, are specifically designed to process Canada's heavy crude. They can't easily transition to other sources. In short, this tragic comedy, Trump successfully pushed away an ally, forcing Canada to hand over its strategic oil reserves to China, while the U.S. still bitterly depends on it. This isn't negotiation. It's a geopolitical self-inflicted wound, a move that didn't make America great, but instead isolated it and inadvertently strengthened the very enemy he sought to defeat. Trump's "I don't think I'll need to" now sounds like a self-fulfilling prophecy. He didn't need to extend the deadline because his actions pushed allies to seek deals elsewhere, to find new partners and new futures, where America is no longer the center. In the end, the cost isn't just the lost barrels of oil. It's the diminished credibility, the loss of a strategic ally, and an indefensible failure on America's own doorstep. Over $700 billion in global trade value is quietly shifting away from the United States and flowing into Canada. While Washington is preoccupied with tariffs, Canada, the quiet neighbor, has suddenly been pulling the economic lifeblood out of the U.S. through key industries like mining, electrification, and logistics. This geopolitical shift isn't an unexpected incident. It's the inevitable result of a prolonged erosion of trust. Historically, the U.S. position was built on the stability of the dollar, military power, and most importantly, the predictability of its policies. However, in recent years, trade wars initiated by Washington, sudden tariff changes, and internal political instability have severely shaken America's position on the global stage. Global corporations and governments who dislike uncertainty began seeking alternatives to mitigate risk. A warning from Seattle Port Commissioner Ryan Culkins about the 40% drop in ship and container traffic wasn't just about tariffs. It's a sign that shipping companies are proactively searching for safer and more stable trade routes. In this gap, Canada has acted. Instead of making loud speeches, Ottawa has focused on tangible actions, building modern infrastructure, securing long-term contracts, and maintaining a stable legal environment. Canada has positioned itself as a reliable alternative. With the message, here's the stability, efficiency, and certainty the world is looking for. Canada's strategy isn't just about competition. It's a methodical attack aimed at seizing the choke points, strategic bottlenecks on which the entire 21st century economy depends. This is a takeover executed with 5 pincers, creating a closed system that neutralizes America's advantages one by one. Canada is pursuing long-term control over battery minerals. Canada isn't rushing to sell resources for short-term gain. It's positioning itself as the gatekeeper of the global EV industry. Every manufacturer from Tesla to Ford with multi-billion-dollar factories has become a hostage to this supply chain. The result? The U.S. may have lost $38 billion in potential battery manufacturing value, not due to a lack of technology or factories, but because of the risk of material shortages. According to the Peterson Institute, this is a loss of industrial sovereignty, a strategic failure that can't be measured in dollars. Controlling minerals is just the beginning. Canada is tightening the noose by turning America's energy dependence into a strategic weapon. For years, the Northeast and Midwest of the U.S. have relied on cheap hydroelectric power from Quebec and Ontario. This dependence was overlooked until Canada turned it into a weapon. As of the 10th of March, 2025, Ontario imposed a 25% surcharge on all electricity exported to the U.S. as part of initial retaliatory measures against U.S. tariffs on Canada. This surcharge will impact 1.5 million homes in Michigan, Minnesota, and New York, causing losses of up to $400,000 per day if it remains in place. Any power producer selling to the U.S. must add the 25% surcharge, which amounts to $10 per megawatt hour. This surcharge adds to the $30 billion in retaliatory tariffs already imposed. Currently, Ontario exports electricity generated throughout the province directly to Michigan, New York, and Minnesota. Ontario has 26 transmission connections with neighboring areas, 11 with Quebec, 3 with Manitoba, 1 with Minnesota, 4 with Michigan, and 7 with New York. The ripple effects from Ottawa's decision could shake things up big time for Detroit economically and socially. It's a direct hit to the competitiveness of factories across the Rust Belt. Higher production costs, slimmer profits, and jobs on the line. That's what's at stake. A single move in Ottawa could spark an economic storm across America's key industrial states. Canada's power price hike. It's not just a jab. It's a calculated double play way beyond simple retaliation. First, it's punishment. A sharp, painful counterpunch to U.S. tariff policies. But it doesn't stop there. Sources say Canada's locked in long-term energy deals with Europe and kicked off plans for a transatlantic power cable. This isn't just raising prices. It's Canada weaponizing its energy. They're signing stable, high-value contracts with Europe and planning that undersea cable to prove a point. The days of special treatment for the U.S. are over. Canada's energy is now headed to whoever pays top dollar and offers the most stability in the AI race. Canada's pulling ahead, raking in capital and talent, with a jaw-dropping 31% spike in AI investment, compared to the US's measly 6%. Take TELUS, for example. They're pouring 70 billion CAD into projects through 2029, with 1.7 billion earmarked for AI and data centers. Canada's building a rock-solid ecosystem with three things the US is sorely missing: legal stability through data agreements with the EU, immigration policies that welcome top talent, and cutting-edge infrastructure. Meanwhile, America's polarized politics and flip-flopping policies are scaring off investors and experts who don't want the risk. Now, let's talk logistics. The US has long leaned on its geographic edge and hubs, like Chicago's rail network. But Canada's flipping the script. In the first half of 2025, U.S. container traffic dropped 12.7%, while Canadian ports like Vancouver and Halifax surged by 26%. Big players like Maersk and CGCM are rerouting from Seattle to Canada's coasts. And here's the kicker. CPKC launched a seamless transport corridor from Mexico to Halifax, completely bypassing Chicago. It's a gut punch to America's inland transport network, faster by 5 days, cheaper and more efficient. For global corporations, the choice is obvious. Go where it's smarter and smoother. That's why $22.5 billion in port revenue and 27,000 American jobs vanished. Not because of a recession, but because a sharper competitor redrew the trade map right under our noses. These moves aren't random. They're a self-reinforcing ecosystem. Cheap energy fuels, mineral processing, AI-powered data centers optimize supply chains. Efficient logistics move resources to global markets. And it's all backed by a stable political environment that keeps pulling in more capital and talent. This is a masterclass in controlling the value chain from start to finish. From raw materials in the ground to finished products on shelves in Tokyo. It's left America isolated and scrambling right in our own backyard. What we're seeing is two opposite trajectories. Canada's on an upward spiral, while the US is sliding downward. Canada's stability, both political and legal, is like a magnet for investment. In a chaotic world, that stability is pure gold, capitals flooding into Canada as a safe haven. The world's best engineers and researchers are flocking to cutting-edge, well-funded projects in a welcoming environment. This concentration of money and brainpower is sparking a Cambrian explosion of innovation, turning Toronto and Montreal into global hubs. On the flip side, America's caught in a negative loop. Political chaos, social division, and unpredictable trade and immigration policies are creating a risky environment. Investors are hitting pause or redirecting long-term projects to safer bets like Canada. Fewer new projects and an uncertain climate make the U.S. less appealing to global talent. Even American citizens are starting to look elsewhere for opportunities. With less capital and fewer bright minds, America's innovation engine is slowing down compared to its rivals. The U.S. isn't just losing companies. It's losing the ecosystem that creates the companies of tomorrow. Once that ecosystem takes root somewhere else, rebuilding it is nearly impossible. This is the kind of loss that cuts deepest. Not just a single battle, but the ability to compete in the wars of the next decade. Canada's proving that in today's world, stability and predictability can be as powerful as military or economic might. Greenland, home to a staggering 36.1 million tons of rare earth minerals, a colossal treasure trove that Donald Trump from the congressional podium declared the U.S. would take control of Greenland one way or the other. This wasn't just a slogan. It was the public face of a massive, seemingly clandestine plan to annex 12 million square kilometers of Canadian and Greenlandic territory, thereby transforming the United States into the planet's largest superpower. The ambition to control the Arctic has been simmering in Washington since World War II, when Nazi Germany ran rampant across Europe. The U.S., whether through foresight or simple opportunism, swiftly established military outposts and radio stations across the icy island as Denmark fell under occupation. This was no mere situational response. but the first move in a long-term strategy to dominate the shortest, most strategic sea route from Russia to America via the Arctic. Today, as the Russian Bear and the Chinese Dragon increasingly bolster their military presence in this frigid expanse, America's Arctic dream, particularly under Trump, has become all the more fierce. From the congressional podium, Trump didn't hesitate to declare he would take control of Greenland one way or the other. A statement that was quintessentially Trump, uncompromising and perhaps a tad undiplomatic. Imagine if the U.S. successfully swallowed whole both Canada and Greenland. Its landmass would double to a staggering 22 million square km, surpassing even Russia and leaving China far behind.